All right, so I'm going to run through how to build a sprint workout. This is really focused on the short sprints. So particularly if you're a 60, 100 meter sprinter, but we can take those principles and apply them upwards to the 400 meter as well. But for the most part, let's just focus on the short sprints. Now I'm going to cover building workout variations for based on whether you have timing equipment or you don't have timing equipment. I'll briefly touch on periodization and this concept of never being more than 2 weeks out from your peak form. And so I'll actually kick the video off from this one because to be clear, I love programming personally, but periodization I don't believe belongs in sprint planning whatsoever. Like what I believe in instead of periodization is developing a program to maximize results for the individual at all times. And so I believe that if you test an athlete really well, so I've got my 1080 so I can really get a lot of testing data on there. I would test the athlete, see where they're at, identify all the strengths and weaknesses, and then go all in on how to maximize it for this current time. Naturally, as you do well with that, the system's going to change in terms of how you need a program. So I prefer to follow what I call sequential development in terms of developing them for where they're at. And as you do that successfully, naturally, it's going to change. I believe in that instead of periodization because I've seen considerably better results with it. And I also believe in being specific. So I don't like, we'll discuss this later, but I don't like getting away from being specific when it comes to sprinting, just because when you are specific, it's still difficult to progress. Like you still have to be good in terms of your specificity and the quality of work. Once you get away from that, things get quite difficult. So I'm very eager to see progress every single session. I know a lot of people don't accept that standard, but it's absolutely possible. And so keep that in mind with the context of this video. I'm not going to focus too much on periodization, obviously, because and my view of sequential development. For more of this, I'll focus on actual building the workout. But it's just worth knowing this before I dive in. And then this idea of never being more than 2 weeks out from your peak is like, it goes along with that. If you're always working on what you need the most at any given time, what we should be able to do is pretty much peak you for a competition within a 2 week period quite comfortably. Typically for me, it's about 2 sessions before, and I can kind of expect to be seeing progress all the time, but see a little spike before a competition just from raising the specificity once again. For me, this is typically because I'll do a lot of resisted assisted work with the 1080 in this section of the workouts, but I'll also do a lot of wearable loads within this section as well. And so that's something that I'll do within peaking for a competition when I'm 2 weeks out. Otherwise, instead of periodization, I'm always focused on, like I said, maximizing the existing current phase for the athlete. What do they need the most for that point? So diving into the session, what I would start with is I'll go through the ideal sample workout, and then I'll touch on the variations for timing and no timing. I understand I've gone pretty much in the opposite order, which is a bit random. But anyway, ideal sample workout, basically we'll chunk it down into 3 sections. So I'll have a preparatory section, specific prep, and then the workout itself. And so what I do is I call them neurological activations. I always begin with this because it's really hard to wrap your head around if you've never seen things like reflexive performance resets, otherwise abbreviated to RPR. If you've never seen the effects of anything like this, it seems a little bit too good to be true. And so if you are diving into those worlds and experimenting with it, just get something to test it, like a jump mat, or if you know someone that can do muscle testing, these sort of things. It helps to get a little bit more buy-in. But from my personal experience, I started off using a lot of RPR with jump athletes before I went into sprinting. And so just with this section of the workout, neurological activations, even if I had someone do their own warm-up prior, and then I use neurological activations afterwards, what I'd find is I would typically get anywhere from 3 to 10 centimeters increase in the standing vertical jump just from adding neurological activations. And this is once they're already warmed up and ready to go. So this is absolutely something that can raise performance. I prefer to start my session like this to give myself the best possible chance, or the athlete the best possible chance at being in a great position to actually train. And so neurological activations is is a whole nother video in itself. It gets a little bit more complicated. It gets you can go on that one forever. And I'm not claiming to be an expert in that area. I just have used enough things to know that this makes a difference. And so when it's coming to that side of things, what I do is I try and use a visual activation, a vestibular activation, and then, as mentioned, I do use the RPR system. RPR, basically, there's a spot in the body that you can massage to activate certain tissue, and so you can go through the whole body and activate every single muscle. Doing this on the spot, really not exerting too much energy. Also getting that done in under 3 minutes. Kind of crazy, but again, test these things, you'll be able to see. Visual activations, I will progress this over time, but the most basic level I start with is usually saccade movement, getting eyes to move side to side, and then you just need to test what someone responds best to. The majority of people will respond best to horizontal side to side or diagonal. Vertical I've seen once, otherwise the majority of people actually got worse with that. So something to test for. Your vestibular system, in simple terms, is your awareness of where you are in space. And the vestibular system's such a good activation just because we're talking about your vestibular system being responsible for your reflexive system. 90% of movement is arguably reflexive. And so activating this can have a great potentiation on movement in general. And so this could be like variations of eye movement again, or it could be something as simple as looking at a fixed object. So I could use my thumb as a fixed object. I lock my eyes on that and I move my head around. So that's a basic one I'll start with a lot of the times. But the whole point is just acknowledge that this world exists and you can get really good potentiation effects from neurological activation. So I like to start the session there. Then go into basic joint movements. I use this almost like screening. So if you can just imagine any variations of different leg movements, basically what I'll do is move through a variety of those. If I find something that doesn't feel good, I stay on it and use that movement just nice and light, repetitive. I use that as feedback. So let's say that you had an issue with just adducting the hip. You could be doing through that movement. It feels a bit uncomfortable. What I would usually say is just to keep doing it until it feels good. And so if we're doing it and we get to about 40, 50, it starts to feel good, then we've provided our body in just a very simple manner enough feedback for it to feel confident that it doesn't need to lock up, feel tight in that area. So I use it as a warm-up, but also a screening process from here. And then rate, like in terms of viewing training from a neurological aspect, which I prefer to do just because it makes sense as far as developing results across a range of different sports. And so what I would look at is, I call it rate because neurologically we adapt to training with rate, magnitude, or duration. And so in simple terms, this is kind of the ability to sustain tension. These are like peak outputs. And then this is how quickly we can produce outputs. And so this is important because this too is responsible for sprinting. With rate, you really want to challenge something that's really, really fast. And so when it comes to sprinting, I want to get movements before I actually start sprinting that are faster than the sprinting challenge itself. And so an example of this is what I would normally start with. Just know I try and make this technically specific to what athlete needs as well. But on a very basic level, like if you raised up on your toes and you just worked on cycling the leg, but as fast as you can, like that movement there, we created a movement that was faster than the actual speed at which your legs cycle when you are sprinting. This would be a great way to start challenging not only the development of this system that contributes to faster times, but to just really get the body firing and getting them ready for sprinting. And so one thing I used to do is I used to I go through my warm up, and then let's say I was doing 10-meter flies here. I used to do this kind of as let's say like the meat of the workout. And then I used to do like a finisher where I used to do, let's say the same example with cycles times 30 seconds for max speed. I used to count how many times. So I'd finish a workout, I'd be exhausted by this point. I used to do these until the times actually dropped off. And so there was some fatigue in the body. And then I would go into my, what I call the finisher at that time. So I would do cycles, 30 seconds, count how many times I could cycle my leg over. And then I would do this again until I saw quite a big drop off in terms of that. And what I was finding as a consistent trend for about 4 workouts in a row was that after I did my first set, my second set was actually better. And to me, what this said was this system hadn't been properly warmed up. Like I haven't properly activated and potentiated the rate side of the equation before I actually got into the meat side of my workout. Because realistically, at this point, I should have come in here and this should have been already fatigued and it should have been getting worse every time. And so what I tried was just simply putting this at the beginning of the session and then going into things from there. What I saw was an immediate return on performance on this one. And then as expected previously, if I did something like this afterwards, the performance was now lower than this and it didn't increase after doing one. So that system was already activated. To me, that was a change. And so I stuck with putting this here and I didn't put it at the end anymore. Once I was done with the top speed stuff, then that was done for the session typically. So rate, as far as a session with the majority of people, I typically do about 4 sets of drills like that. You can keep it nice and short, like 10 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, or you can develop on that, depends what we want to do. Obviously, there's a lot of options. So I'm just keeping things quite general. After this, the preparatory period, body's ready to perform or very close to. I like to go into what I call specific prep. And so this is where I would go look at break down the film on how you're actually sprinting and then address what you believe at the existing time to be your greatest technical needs. And then this is the part of the workout where I want to work on those. And so it helps me get prepared for all out 100% intensity sprinting afterwards, but it also helps set the stage. So if I get some drills, if I'm working on some things that are helping me break through technically what I need, then in theory, it should help me perform a little bit better afterwards, or at least be chipping away in the background for advancing technique over time so that technical advances becomes a thing that also helps drive progress up. That's the portion here. Don't spend too long there, but I definitely do address that. And then I'll get into acceleration. I'll put Pmax. This is just how it comes up on the 1080s as a habit, but this means power output. So my acceleration and / power output work. For me, in an ideal scenario, this is where I would use wearable loading and I would use resistant loading. So if like the 1080 or a sled, you're doing that, you're timing it, and you're adding the wearable loads. As a side note, the wearable loads is something that I use to not only overload rotational inertia, which is something that you can't do in the weight room, but I use it to drive technical changes. So they stick into different spots. Again, I'll address what I need technically, use the wearable loading to not only overload, like I said, rotational inertia, but help drive the technical action that I want to see. Another thing that helps, again, use a technical aspect to help drive progress up in the background. Win-win in terms of also developing power. So that is what I would do here. When you're peaking for a competition, what I typically do is take wearable loads off for 2 sessions, and I don't do resisted sprinting if that is the focus. That is not always going to be the focus. If you follow my version of, I can't say it's periodization, but I'll just say sequential development is what I call it. If you follow my version of that, then that is basically how I go about things. And then after that point, this is where I like to finish my session with top speed. Just run this until I see performance either drop off or I feel myself neurologically I feel fried, like the session's done, or the athletes give me that feedback where they just feel like, and that can happen as well if you had like a huge PB, you can hit that mark and then feel after a few minutes that you're just dropping off, like you're not coming back up. So we're running this point, just getting quality work in for as long as it's going to be productive. So I don't like to do this with a bunch of fatigue. Typically, when you've adapted to this style of training, 3 to 4 reps at max intensity, particularly if we use anything like assisted sprinting, that would be pretty quality work. After that point, I would shut it down. This point, often never discussed, but the review and recovery, what I like to do after a session, and this is kind of immediately, is I like to note whether I felt anything during the session. So if I was warming up around this point and I felt like some tightness in my adductor, even if it went away, I would just note like tightness wherever, and then went away. And so I would do that. Did I notice anything through here? I would also note that in there. If not, I would note that I didn't feel anything. And then I would add to this that night or the next morning as well. So the following days, I would add notes as well. Then, most importantly, taking all this feedback and then making adjustments and say, if it was a Monday and I trained and I expect to be back into here on a Thursday, it is my responsibility to take this information here and apply it in this gap to ensure that if there was it was something like I had tightness here or whatever the issue was, I want that to be gone by the time I'm into this next session, or at least improved. And so this is my means of keeping yourself healthy and actually keeping yourself in the best possible shape to keep performing at a high level. And so this is a huge key. If you are going to train like this and apply it properly with a lot of other principles that aren't being discussed here, but if you apply it successfully, you're going to make a lot of progress. And so you're going to be driving performance up a lot, and the demands physically are going to go up with it naturally as well. If you do not apply this concept of constantly evaluating your body and making adjustments, it'll be very difficult to maintain this for months and months and months. So huge piece, regardless of whether you use sequential development or whatever, something that should be added just in general there as well. So that is just like the general overview of it. Now, what I would do is, this is like the ideal scenario. So I'm talking about myself with wearable loading and the 1080. If we don't have wearable loading, I will still go about the same, the same setup here. If we don't have timing equipment, what I would say is I would start to make quite big changes. So this period would remain the same. But what we would do once we get to this point is I would shift to a far more technical focus. So if we had like, I'll show you an ideal example. I might do, it could be like 3.3 kgs of resistance plus 600 grams of wearable loading, and I might do like block 20s here. So that could be the majority of my acceleration work. The wearables is driving a technical change for me, and to a certain degree, so is the resistance. It's helping me get into certain positions. So I don't need a lot of technical constraints. Once I don't have timing feedback, and so I can't adjust to that, what I would then sit on is, let's say drills. So if I'm getting really long out the back and I want to try and limit that triple extension so that my angles and projection angles are better, then I might work on something more like a bent leg prime time times 20. And if I had a sled, maybe I do that on a sled with, let's say, 20 kgs. I'm just putting it out there. I would do this, and then I would review it, like filming it. I would review the technique and make sure that I'm executing it the way I want from there. Now, I just want to point out as well that most phones can be set up to film. And so even if I do have a scenario where I'm saying I'm using a phone timing, and let's just be clear, like there shouldn't ever be a scenario where you just can't time in general, given that you do have phone. And so I would still be using this. It's just that this might be like A1 and A2, or A then B. And I might do maybe like a block 20 or a skip in, and I'll look at timing the 10 to 20 portion. And so I'd set the phone up. What's going to be really annoying but necessary if you are going to film on the phone is that you will need a measuring wheel to make sure that everything is on point as possible. And so if we had the 20 meter segment here and you got the 10 meters, you're going to need to be as tedious as, let's say, measuring to the 5 meter mark and then measuring out, like, say, 10 meters from here and setting up your phone on a tripod so that it is at the exact same filming position every single time that you do this. If you don't get it exactly on point, it creates enough variability to start throwing off these times. And so you absolutely must go through the trouble of going, getting all these things together and say, better case scenario is just to get a timing thing, even if it's like a free lap, nice and cheap. On the cheaper end, I know it's not nice and cheap, but on the cheaper end. Otherwise, we could get like a measuring wheel for like $20 probably, and I don't know, a cheap tripod, set it up from there. So that's something to keep in mind. And then a similar approach once we get to top speed. So at the moment, with a lot of athletes, if they're not fast enough to meet my standards, then I probably won't use wearable weights with top speed stuff. And so ideal scenario, I really like to go slingshots paired with constant assisted pulls. So this is with the 1080, probably the best means of developing top speed. If you're not sure about slingshots, I've got other videos on them, but it's basically assisted loading at the beginning and then it drops off. So it pulls you to the beginning and then you build from there. I pair these two together. If not, again, same idea. So we're going to say with the phone timing, you're going to set up, let's say, a 10 meter period, or if you do 20 meter, same idea. I'll probably just stick to this in terms of being able to get it right on the video. You're going to be using either apps or frames per second, whatever it is. It just has to be consistent in terms of your timing method. But what I would do is either pair this or again, do like an A and B scenario where you get what is my greatest technical need, and then you chuck it in from here. Typically with technical constraints for top speed without timing equipment, I like to create some idea of overspeed. So if you had the wearable loads, you could load, for example, one limb, like one leg, and this would create an overspeed action on the other side. If you don't have those, you could do a single leg emphasize run where you don't really push too much off, let's say, the left leg, but the right side is really exaggerated. And if I don't push completely off with a full effort off my left leg, then I have less time to create the action on the right side, create an overspeed effect. Typically, single leg emphasize runs pull you into really nice front side mechanics. So this could be a nice constraint if that's what you need. I'll just put single runs, but we're talking about single leg emphasize runs. This could be a means of going, all right, I'm using a technical constraint and I'm using a variation of timing, and I'm going to put these two together. So that could be like this, or I could start off with, say, single leg runs for a few sets and go with this. It's obviously something that you can experiment with and see what works well for you. Or something I'd probably try is maybe doing 2 sets of these. You might do, say, 40 meters, once each side, and then go into like 2 to 4 sets of fly 10s. We have a 30 meter run up into a top 10 meter or 40 meter to a top 10. Do 3 to 4 of those, and then maybe come back and hit maybe one of those. So it's up to you. It's a experiment round. If you're collecting information, you can start to adjust based on what's working. I would just say expect to see improvement session to session. And if you don't, and this is for consecutive sessions, start making adjustments. Like something is definitely wrong with the program there. All right, so that's really how I go about developing the ideal program. It's my version of a generalized overview. Things will change a lot. As you get into it, it can be a bit daunting with collecting a lot of data, but the more information you collect, the easier things get to make decisions in a way. So if you're collecting 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, if some areas improve and others don't, this is starting to guide you in the direction that you need in terms of, all right, I need to make adjustments somewhere in the format. So this format I've stuck with for a while now because it's been successful across the board. My only variation in this becomes in the tools that I use within that. And so, like, I might see one athlete's having great technical changes and another one's not. And so this would just probably, and even if they are both progressing, this will be an area where I'll probably start playing around with different variability in terms of technical KPIs. The drills I'm using to try and force changes that I want. So a lot of variables. I actually think that this is, while it can sound complicated at first, it's much more simple, and to be honest, makes a lot more sense than periodization, where you're going to work on different phases and different times and try and map everything perfectly together. I just absolutely don't believe in any athlete not being able to sprint year round. I just think as well, a last little rant on periodization is, if we work on a few months on, like, it's a speed endurance emphasis, and then you've got comps here, so you're going to work on being a bit more specific and bringing in, this will be like a top speed phase. Like, in terms of the intensities that you're touching, like if we just look at the intensity of your training, like it'll be like with speed endurance, it would be sort of low, maybe creeping up a bit, and then you're just going to spike it once you start going to the top speed stuff from there. And this spike here that's where you'd be concerned as far as injuring yourself or having some niggles or things creep up, because it's such a spike in intensity going from something that you're not used to. And so ironically, I think it's safer to go with intensities just always being up, getting used to this, and creeping it up over time each session. Like, I mean, this makes not only the fastest progress, but we're also keeping our body pretty much used to working at this demand, which is really just sprinting, the short sprints, year round. And again, to be able to maintain this, it's really key that you understand this concept here, even if you apply the reviewing your sessions and making adjustments for the next workout to this concept of going speed endurance and you spike up. It's going to be really difficult to manage. Like, again, when we go from here to that spike in intensity, it's going to be really difficult to manage this portion, even with keeping notes. You've given your body completely different stimulus, completely different stress. And what I will say is, what you do for the majority of the time, this is that stress being applied to the body. That's what you get really good at managing. And in terms of both volume and just in terms of recovery, you'll get good at handling this. And so when it comes to getting faster with sprinting, top speed is always going to be the king here. And so this is the thing that I would want to see everyone get really good at, not only recovering from, but handling more of. If we can handle, say, we go from handling successfully 2 top speed set reps per session to going up to 4, and we can still recover in time for our next session, we've doubled the amount of productive work that can help drive progress a little bit faster. So again, this is always going to be key. I really would encourage getting away from periodization. I think this is very traditional, ancient-like planning that really needs to change. But it is what the majority of the world is still doing. And so what I would say on that is that if the majority of the world is doing this, the majority of the world will be accepting progression standard that is quite slow. If you can pivot away to something that works better, this gives you a considerable advantage in terms of being able to deliver, if you're a coach, more results than the next person. But as an athlete, be able to catch up on those athletes that are ahead of you right now.